unity, perseverance. You could do anything to us and we're still going to be here.
Today is the unofficial day of remembrance and recognition for what has happened in the boarding schools.
People here are remembering the stories of lost loved ones.
Makes me grateful today I'm here compared to all the ones that were taken.
Stories of Indigenous children stolen from their families, forced into government-run boarding schools.
I had that haircut too.
Matilda Sampson, a grandmother and community leader, survived one of those schools. We met her here at Fort Spokane, a former Indigenous boarding school.
Everything was taken from me.
Native boarding schools were created by the U.S. and Canadian governments in the late 1800s. The goal, according to the Department of Interior, forcibly relocating the children to schools where their identities, languages, and beliefs were to be forcibly suppressed.
I wasn't used to wearing uniform clothes and not allowed to talk our language or tell our stories.
There are accounts of physical and psychological abuse at these schools. Matilda, a member of a Canadian tribe called the Adam Lake Band, attended Kamloops Indian Residential School in British Columbia in the early 1970s.
They always said there was children buried behind the school.
The tragic hidden truth of some Native American boarding schools.
More than 1,000 bodies found in mass graves at schools in Canada.
Seeing the headlines about the mass graves found at her old boarding school last summer brought Matilda back.
When I first saw it, I was like, I couldn't believe it. It was so heartbreaking. I have a lot of hurt and a lot of hate. I'm angry because I was brought up with a lot of abuse.
Years of alcohol abuse, a coping mechanism to drown out the unsettling memories.
I spent too long in my life hating. That's not who I am today.
Matilda's experience at the school was not one of a kind. There were hundreds of them across North America, including more than 350 Indigenous boarding schools across the United States, mostly government-funded, some run by churches. More than 60,000 Native American children were placed in these schools. That's nearly 83% of all school-aged Indigenous children by the 1920s.
Here we are on the Western Navajo Indian Reservation.
Historic videos show those children side by side with government officials. Stripped of their Native identities, their traditional songs replaced by humiliating ones. One of those schools is still open, Chemawa Indian Training School in Salem, Oregon. It started out in Forest Grove, Oregon, about 40 miles west of Portland. More than 300 Indigenous children were forced to go there. Many, like these Spokane children, never made it out alive.
This is a photograph of students who were en route from Spokane to the Forest Grove Indian School.
Ava Gugamos is an archivist at Pacific University in the city of Forest Grove.
Martha Lott, also known as Maddie Lott, died within about 6 months of this photograph being taken. We think it's probably her.
Over the past 10 years, Ava's research has been locating the remains of Indigenous children like Maddie Lott.
We believe she is buried right about here.
The government relocated Forest Grove to Salem in 1885 and changed the name to Chemawa Indian School. But the mistreatment of the children continued and the number of deaths rose.
We're on sacred ground.
Frederick Lane from the Lactamus tribe attended Chemawa in the 1980s. On Indigenous Peoples Day, Lane came to Chemawa to pay his respects.
They were killed. They were somebody's child. These children were stolen. They lie right here.
For half a century, they lie here, their stories buried along with them. In the 1960s, a bulldozer was sent into the neglected cemetery at Chemawa and wiped out the original headstone plates.
And the plates were put back in an order that they assumed copied an old map.
Sue-Ann Reddick, a former Chemawa employee, was distraught about the destruction of the cemetery.
These plates do not necessarily relate to the location of the remains of the children.
So we're hopeful that some of this research can help narrow down what are probably unmarked graves.
Sue-Ann and Ava teamed up to convert old cemetery maps and information into a digital database to find unmarked graves.
Based on our list of who died, these ones, we don't know where they were buried. Makes me feel sad and also, I guess, honestly, just a little bit angry that more wasn't done.
Now, families from all over the country can find out who exactly is buried at this cemetery, their tribal affiliation, their burial location, and cause of death.
To stand here and think about that family coming to this school, losing that child while they were there, there aren't any words for it. It's a kind of pain that only parents who have lost their children can understand. You just wish somehow you could comfort somebody, and maybe that is the whole purpose of the work that Ava and I are doing.
We reached out to school officials to ask about Chemawa's history. They referred us to the Bureau of Indian Education, which did not respond.
I guess it's bittersweet with the sad history of Chemawa Indian School.
Lane says the Chemawa of today has evolved into a refuge for young Native Americans.
Chemawa has enlightened my ability to move forward as an Indigenous person.
Today, Indigenous students learn their culture and history here. The cemetery, a reminder of what the children who came before them endured.
They have no voice, but their voice is right here, right now, through the good work that we're trying to do to protect Chemawa Indian School.
I've been sober 30 years now.
Today, Matilda Sampson has found strength in her recovery and healing from a past no longer buried.
I just want to do the best I can with what I have and share it with others. But now I just got to keep moving forward. Can't keep that hating me, because if I do, then they win.
Posters from the past with the message, the Chinese must go. This evidence of Tacoma's determination to drive out the Chinese community in the late 19th century is not just a reminder for Teresa Pan Hosley.
We actually living in a circle.
She says it still feels relevant.
History repeats itself.
She wants to break that cycle.
I love Tacoma, and I want Tacoma to be a place that can welcome anyone.
This is the beginning of the park and the design.
That's why she volunteers her time to ensure Chinese immigrants are celebrated here, because that hasn't always happened.
Tacoma doesn't have a Chinatown. Do you think that's a direct result?
Yes, yeah. It is a direct result of what happened to Tacoma.
A lot of people are not aware of it.
Not aware of what unfolded in Tacoma in 1885.
So you're saying it's not already in all of the schools in the city?
Absolutely not.
Lotus Perry, an instructor at University of Puget Sound, wants that to change.
First of all, we have to understand a little bit about the background, right? A lot of these Chinese came to this country, United States, for work. And they came here and referring to United States as the Golden Mountain, right? They're here for there's the gold dig rush that quickly died down, and then a lot of them stayed here to build railroads.
In 1873, the Northern Pacific Railway leased land near the railroad tracks to Chinese workers, and that became Tacoma's Chinatown. Around the same time, the national economy went into a slump. The sour financial situation put a focus on foreign workers, according to Associate Professor of History Andrew Gomez.
There was a clear connection between a feeling of economic anxiety that was taking place at the time and pairing that with racism. And that sort of hits this important point in 1882 when the Chinese Exclusion Act is passed, which bars all future Chinese migration into the United States.
3 years later, there's about 700 residents of Chinese descent in Tacoma. Not a small number. It was actually 10% of Tacoma's population. Washington wasn't a state, it was a territory at the time, and many people living in Tacoma were immigrants. But Chinese immigrants were singled out.
They're thinking about, well, why do we have to tolerate them for working so hard and taking on lower wages, right? They become the scapegoat.
At the height of the racial tension, the mayor, Jacob Weisbach, a German immigrant, and other prominent citizens led an anti-Chinese organizing effort.
At the Alpha Opera House was this mass meeting, basically outlining what became the terms of Chinese exclusion in Tacoma.
During this time, the anti-Chinese sentiment was in article after article in this newspaper, the Tacoma Daily Ledger, and it was even in advertisements too. These messages were delivered with a deadline, November 3rd, 1885. All Chinese must go.
And so November 3rd, that morning, there's a mob that eventually is composed of hundreds of local Tacomans that go basically house to house and expel the remaining Chinese American population.
That amounted to about 200 people, forced to march for miles down Pacific Avenue through the mud and drenching rain until they reached trains bound for Oregon. The ethnic cleansing was given a title, the Tacoma Method, and applauded nationally by some for being nonviolent. But a number of Chinese merchants who were in Tacoma on that November day told U.S. officials that it was anything but peaceful. They described an angry mob, some carrying pistols or clubs, who broke forcibly into the houses, smashing doors and breaking in windows, rounding people up, ransacking homes, and stealing valuables. In the days that followed, Tacoma's Chinatown went up in flames.
One of the Chinese American merchants mentions watching it burn, and mentions that no one tried to halt the burning.
Arrests were made. The mob's ringleaders, known as Tacoma's 27, which included the mayor, were put on trial.
Charges are brought against them, but due to a series of legal technicalities, they're let off each time.
So nobody actually held accountable.
Teresa says the echoes of that day in 1885 are still felt. And that's why she's worked with the Citizens Committee in the city of Tacoma to create this, the Chinese Reconciliation Park, which is not only a place to look back and learn. Recently, it's also been a gathering spot to rally against the hate crimes reported during the pandemic targeting Asian Americans.
People of my descent being shouted at, go back to your country, you bring the virus, right? This is like, wait a second, I thought we were looking at this as a history of, Chinese must go. It's almost still relevant here, right?
We have these silhouettes on the stone of the Chinese.
Larry Hosley, Teresa's husband, says work at this park continues. They plan to add a multicultural pavilion next to serve as an education center for the community.
Try to help to correct the wrong, to right a wrong.
Creating a welcoming space to reflect on the past, ponder the present, and move forward with this goal.
Brighter future for our community.
In Tacoma, Natalie Swaby, King 5 News.
From rain-soaked fields in Auburn to orchards near Yakima.
The field is a very, very hard work, and it takes a toll of your body.
There's truth to that old phrase, a farmer's work is never done.
My husband fell off a ladder, I fell off 2 times pregnant of my kids when I was picking the cherry and the apples.
This woman we're calling Mari, until recently spent her life working in the fields in the Yakima Valley. The mother of 5 has the calloused hands to prove it.
Arthritis, yeah, they start hurting.
A job that until recently was exempt from overtime. She doesn't want to show her face because she still has relatives working in the fields she left.
It's nice to know that you're getting paid a little more now, recognizing the work that we do.
Senate Bill 5172, signed into Washington state law in May of 2021, ensures overtime pay for agriculture workers starting in January of next year. Senator Curtis King of Yakima introduced the bill, voted for it, but no longer supports it.
You do support overtime pay for agriculture.
I voted for the bill, so I have to say yes.
But
I'm being as non-committal as I can be, because the problem is both. It puts a real burden on ag, and it puts a burden on the very farmers that it's supposed to be helping.
He takes issue with a provision added that could leave producers on the hook for years of backed overtime pay.
And my fear is now with this overtime, and I believe, and I've been told by the ag community that they can't afford to pay overtime, that they're going to cut them back to 40 hours a week.
It's going to make a lot of families look for a second job.
Farming isn't like other industries.
It's just going to make farmers close their doors, especially the smaller ones.
It's the crop, not the managers, that dictate the work hours. At least, that's what the opposition, what farm worker Jose Salazar will tell you.
It sounds nice to say, oh, it's overtime.
Salazar is a third-generation farmer.
It's not going to happen You might get 1 or 2 hours. I don't think there's going to be a farmer out here in the state of Washington or anywhere that's going to be capable of keeping the amount of workers and keeping the amount of hours and still pay overtime.
A concern we took to the labor union championing the overtime fight.
Is there a long-term thought to this, that we make conditions difficult for farmers in Washington state and we ultimately just end up getting produce from outside the country, from another state?
California has some of these progressive policies already in place, already rolling out, and the sky did not fall. The vast majority of the food that Americans eat is grown within the United States.
Elizabeth Strader is with the United Farm Workers Union. Their social media campaign features gritty images of the reality of farm life. She says this legislation is a step towards leveling the playing field for these workers.
It has been about being seen as an equal person, being seen as having and deserving the same equal rights as someone who works in a factory or in a hospital or in a school or in a steel mill.
She's talking about workers like 87-year-old Manuel Salazar.
¿Qué quiere usted que saben la gente de dónde viene su comida?
I asked him what people should know about where their food comes from.
Porque trabajamos para la nación.
He said, we work for the country, for the whole country. From here to Mexico, everyone eats what we harvest.
Toda la gente come lo que nosotros cosechamos.
You have a situation where we're already paying the highest wages in the country in Washington state for farm labor.
That's Rosella Mosby, the farm's owner. She says margins in her industry are razor thin. Expenses keep rising.
We're paying per hour what the average is per day in Mexico.
And the more we dig,
This is how they get their food.
the more we discover this story is anything but black and white.
With these hard-working hands that get up at 3 o'clock in the morning till 3 o'clock in the afternoon to pick.
What we do know is no matter what the lawmakers do, these farmers will continue working the fields. Food will end up on your table.
Did we go? Are we going? No, I'm just kidding.
It's a big deal that this Renton family showed up today. If this was a year ago, Steve Ramey, his wife Alex, and his daughter Caitlin might not have agreed to have a hard conversation with a race educator as a family.
Glad to see you all actually here as a family unit.
Steve and Alex don't ever talk about being white. Caitlin rarely talks to them about being biracial and the only black person in her white family. But after nationwide calls for racial justice, Steve recently admitted something no one in his family expected.
I know that I'm racist and I don't want to be, I don't mean to be, I'm trying not to be.
We've been following Steve for months since he told us that. This is the last of a series of intensive counseling sessions with race educator Karina Hooks, where Steve has been learning how not to be racist.
What makes you not the norm is that you're admitting that you're a racist and that you want to change. That's different.
He's made progress. He realized the jokes he tells are racist and are hurting his daughter.
How does it make you feel?
Uncomfortable and angry.
And that going through life pretending not to see Caitlin's color
Then you don't see our experiences and what we go through as a person of color
can be more harmful than simply seeing and embracing her differences.
I'm using that as an excuse to be racist, I guess.
Now, Steve tells Karina he's taken another big step. He attempted to do something he's never done before. Talk to Caitlin about race at home.
We're just sitting there eating in the kitchen or something, and I went, so how's it feel to be black? She goes, shut up.
I said, shut up.
I went, I'm not supposed to ask that? She goes, no.
It didn't go well.
It caught me off guard. He's like a white man and I'm a woman of color. How is he supposed to be able to ever understand how I feel?
What would be a way that he could have asked you that would have had your response be more in a way where you felt like sharing?
I guess he could have just been like, how are you feeling? He didn't really have to didn't have to really say, how does it feel to be black?
These conversations rarely end well in their family. Caitlin says every time she tries to talk about race with Steve and her mom, Alex,
They get like overwhelmed, and so it turns into frustration, and then they get like angry.
And is that usually if it's about race or just in general?
Race.
Caitlin talked about her discomfort last session in front of Steve.
I'm very closed off with my parents.
So what percent? Would you say 100?
100, a lot.
We've got to bring that number down.
So why do you feel uncomfortable about it?
I'm just very I like making people feel bad or you know.
So there's a story in her head is that we're going to make, you feel bad.
And that's why they've come here today, to figure out why it's so hard to talk about race, and then to talk about it anyway.
So what's the defense about? Let's unpack it just a little bit.
I feel that maybe she's attacking my parenting skills. I thought I was doing everything right, as a parent.
What if you did the best you could, giving the tools and the skills that you had at the time?
Yeah, well, it makes sense.
But I also want you to know that she would not be who she is without you.
Right, and I understand that, and you are correct.
Karina says what they're doing, sitting here, finally talking about race, takes courage.
You have to be willing to stick your foot in your mouth. A lot of people will say, I don't talk about it because I don't want to say the wrong thing. But not talking about it, that to me creates a lot more harm and discomfort, to act like it doesn't exist. And as long as people keep leaning in, there's so much hope. It's when we shut down that nothing's possible.
To start listening to Caitlin without getting defensive is going to take more time, patience, and more talking. And Karina wants a commitment, family therapy for all three of them with a new counselor.
So I asked Alex if you're 100% all in, and you said?
Yes.
Caitlin?
Yes.
Okay, Steve?
Yes.
I'm so excited to see where each of you go with that. You have all of the right ingredients. You're just trying to figure out the recipe. I would love for her to be able to have open conversations with her dad, and for them to be in a loving, reciprocal relationship about what it means to bring our best selves to each other. And that includes her blackness. It includes his whiteness. There's so much that they can learn from each other.
Now, as their final session is winding down, Karina has one last exercise for the family, a poem she's had them each write about themselves, a chance to open up and really see each other.
I am empathic and loved. I understand I have the ability to make a difference.
I am beautiful and kind. I wonder who I'll become.
Just breathe, sis, breathe. Take your time.
I want self-love. I am beautiful and kind. I hope for self-peace. I am beautiful and kind.
You are beautiful and kind, and so much more. And so the journey for healing is going to be lifelong, but I think that they're making some really great ground, covering some great ground. They've opened up more. I'm hopeful for what transformation gets to take place.
The most egregious are the Redskins, hands down. Warriors, Braves, Indians.
The Totems, the King Salmons.
The Chiefs, the Seminoles.
Savages, Redskins. I don't hurt to say a little bit.
And it's not just in professional sports. Images like this are all around our society, even in public schools. And for many Native Americans, that's devastating.
Haumu, mi nania Ivy Pete, nu kuyui tukadu. I am Ivy Pete. I am a Pyramid Lake Paiute.
Ivy Pete is a senior at North Central High School in Spokane, where for decades the school mascot was the Indians. Every day while heading to class, she faced this glass case. Inside, a gift from alumni, a life-size figure representing the school's mascot.
To me, it looked like animals in a zoo. We've heard that a lot.
Ivy says it may seem harmless to other students, but to her, it felt like the school was turning her culture into a mockery.
To see those mannequins in the case that were supposed to represent me, people were telling me I should feel honored by that. I don't feel honored. Why do I have to feel honored by something that doesn't represent me?
Ivy is not alone. Experts have shown, especially for young Native Americans, these images can be damaging to the perception of who they are. Years of research have shown the use of such mascots isn't only insulting, it can bring about cultural trauma.
I am Stephanie Freiberg. I'm a member of the Tulalip tribes, and I'm a professor at the University of Michigan.
Dr. Stephanie Freiberg has researched the profound impact of mascots on Native youth.
Exposing them to Native mascots, it decreased self-esteem, their sense of what their community could achieve, their academic achievement goals.
For Ivy, the mascot did affect her sense of self.
I felt ashamed. I felt like an imposter in my own skin, knowing my own identity, knowing my history, knowing my family.
It's a very romanticized, noble, savage, warrior princess type representation that doesn't really account for our everyday experiences today.
Ivy protested the Indians' mascot by creating this Letterman's jacket featuring a marmot, not a native headdress. She got involved in bringing young voices to the state legislature.
Good morning. I am a junior in high school from Spokane.
Here she is testifying before a virtual House committee hearing.
Today I speak on behalf of the Legislative Youth Advisory Council in support of House Bill 1356.
That's the bill that prohibits the inappropriate use of Native American names, symbols, or images as public school mascots, logos, or team names.
Started talking to policymakers, stakeholder groups, and really threw my full force into this bill.
I am Slinket and Aleut, and I am the only Native American to serve in the entire state legislature.
State Representative Deborah Lekanoff, who represents Whatcom, Skagit, and San Juan counties, is one of the bill's sponsors.
I really believe that we have an opportunity here to re-identify who we are as humans. We're not a character, and we're not a cartoon.
This spring, Governor Jay Inslee signed the bill into law.
This entire mascot debate has been solely and entirely fueled by the fire of our ancestors, by those who came before us, and so I stand on their shoulders.
My name is Willie Frank III. My Indian name is Kolashkid.
Willie Frank is chairman of the Nisqually Indian tribe. He's working with schools in Thurston County to help them remove offensive mascots.
We have a picture of our beautiful Mount Rainier.
Willie took us to the Wahilut Indian School near Olympia to show us how schools can feature Native symbols accurately and respectfully.
It's done the right way.
The school includes a mural telling the story of the Nisqually River.
And in our language, Tequotma is what my grandfather called our mountain. I think it was to make sure that we teach our kids who they are. And when you walk into the school, you feel there's something here that this isn't a joke, this isn't a cartoon.
Today, Ivy can walk through her school a little more comfortably. The glass case is gone. This headdress gone too. And the North Central High Indians are now the Wolf Pack.
We're the Wolf Pack now, which is exciting. We're making all these changes. I get to compete in track this year with a new uniform that no longer feels like a denigration to my culture, which is so cool.
Not all schools have made progress like Ivy's. The deadline to do so is fast approaching on December 31st. Schools that don't comply could lose state funding and the important opportunity to create a new path for Native American students.
Just like House Bill 1356 is not an end-all be-all, it's an invitation to conversation, an invitation to reparative justice.
They have to be strong on knowing who they are and know that they matter, or else we're going to continue down this road of historical trauma. And we as the First Americans can no longer take that on. We have to grow in a better way.